Next time you are sitting in an airplane seat, somewhere over the Atlantic, half asleep, and the pilot's voice crackles through the cabin speakers with a routine update altitude, estimated arrival time, current speed, pay close attention to that last number. He will not say kilometers per hour. He will not say miles per hour. He will say something like, "We are currently cruising at approximately 480 knots." And if you are like most passengers, you will nod slightly, pull your blanket up, and not think about it for even a second. Because somehow, despite never having been taught what a knot actually is, you have absorbed enough aviation language to accept the word without question. But stop and think about it for just a moment. You are inside one of the most technologically advanced machines ever built by human beings. It is guided by satellite navigation systems of extraordinary precision, monitored by digital instruments sampling hundreds of data points per second, connected to air traffic control networks spanning the entire planet. And the unit of speed this miracle of engineering uses to describe its own velocity through the sky is named after a physical knot tied in a piece of rope. A piece of rope that sailors used on wooden ships more than 400 years ago. Not metaphorically, literally. The knot as a unit of speed exists today because, in the 17th century, sailors actually counted the knots in a rope to measure how fast their ship was moving. And the reason that ancient systems survived into the age of GPS, jet engines, and satellite navigation is not tradition for its own sake. It is because the knot is, in a very precise and elegant sense, built directly into the geometry of the Earth itself. Welcome to Normal Things, Crazy Origins. Today we are uncovering the full story of the knot, where it came from, why it measures what it measures, and why pilots flying modern jets across the stratosphere are still using a unit of speed invented by sailors counting rope on a wooden deck. To understand the knot, you have to go back to the 17th century and appreciate a very specific and very serious problem. Sailors crossing open oceans had no landmarks. No roads, no signposts, no fixed reference points of any kind. Navigation depended entirely on knowing two things: where you were and how fast you were moving. If you knew your starting position, your heading, and your speed, you could calculate where you should be at any given time, a technique called dead reckoning. It was imprecise. It accumulated errors over long voyages, but it was the best tool available. And in the hands of an experienced navigator, it was good enough to cross oceans without ending up on a reef. The heading could be determined with a compass. The position could be estimated using the stars. But speed was the hardest variable to measure on an open sea with no reference points and no instruments beyond what you could build from wood, rope, and sand. The solution sailors developed was called the chip log, and it was a masterpiece of practical ingenuity for its time. Here is how it worked. A flat, wedge-shaped piece of wood, the chip was weighted along one edge with lead so that it floated upright in the water like a tiny anchor. This chip was attached to a long line of rope wound around a wooden reel. But the rope was not plain rope. At regular intervals along its length, the sailors had tied physical knots, actual knots in the rope, spaced at a very specific distance apart. When the navigator wanted to measure the ship's speed, a sailor would throw the chip overboard off the stern of the ship. Because of its weighted edge, the chip would sit upright in the water and resist being dragged forward. It would remain more or less stationary relative to the ocean while the ship sailed away from it, pulling the rope off the reel. At the same moment the chip hit the water, another sailor would flip a sandglass, typically measured for 28 seconds. As the rope ran out, the navigator would let it slide through his fingers and count the knots as they passed. 1, 2, 3, 4. When the sand ran out, he would clamp the rope, count the knots that had run through his hand, and that number was the ship's speed. If 7 knots had passed through his fingers in 28 seconds, the ship was traveling at 7 knots. The physical knots in the rope became the unit of measurement. And the name stuck so completely, so permanently, that we are still using it today on aircraft traveling at altitudes where wooden ships would disintegrate instantly. But here's the question that matters. Why were the knots tied at that specific spacing? Why not every 10 feet, or every 100 feet, or at any other convenient distance? This is where the chip log stops being a clever nautical trick and starts being something much more interesting. A direct physical connection between a piece of rope on a 17th century sailing ship and the geometry of the planet Earth. To understand it, you need to understand how sailors measured distance at sea. On land, distance is measured in statute miles, a unit that originated with the Romans, based roughly on 1,000 double paces of a marching soldier, and standardized over centuries into the 5,280 feet that the statute mile represents today. It is a unit of walking, grounded in human locomotion, perfectly suited for measuring distances across land. But at sea, statute miles are nearly useless. A sailor navigating by the stars does not care about Roman marching paces. He cares about latitude and longitude, the coordinate grid that describes positions on the surface of a sphere. And that grid operates in degrees, minutes, and seconds of arc. Here is the critical insight that changed everything. The Earth is a sphere, or close enough to one for navigational purposes. A full circle has 360 degrees. Each degree of latitude can be divided into 60 smaller units called minutes of arc. And here is the stroke of genius that underpins the entire system. 1 minute of arc of latitude on the Earth's surface corresponds to a distance of almost exactly 1 nautical mile. This was not an arbitrary decision. It was a deliberate and extraordinarily practical choice made by navigators who understood that if you defined your unit of distance to match your coordinate system, navigation became dramatically simpler. If a captain looked at his chart and saw that his destination was 2 degrees of latitude to the north, he instantly knew, without any calculation, that he had 120 nautical miles to travel. The map and the ruler became the same instrument. The coordinate system and the distance measurement were perfectly unified. 1 degree of latitude equals 60 nautical miles. 1 minute of latitude equals 1 nautical mile. The geometry of the Earth and the geometry of navigation became identical. And that brings us back to the knot in the rope. Once navigators had defined the nautical mile in terms of the Earth's coordinates, they needed their speed measurement to match. A ship traveling at 1 knot covers 1 nautical mile in 1 hour. To make the chip log produce that measurement accurately to make the count of physical knots in the rope correspond to the number of nautical miles per hour, the sailors did the mathematics. If you want 1 knot to equal 1 nautical mile per hour, and you are timing the rope over a 28-second sandglass, then the knots in the rope need to be spaced at exactly 47 feet and 3 inches apart. That specific, apparently arbitrary spacing is not arbitrary at all. It is the precise mathematical result of converting 1 nautical mile per hour into a distance that can be measured in 28 seconds of rope running through a sailor's fingers. The physical knot in the rope and the shape of the Earth are connected by a single, elegant equation. When a 17th century sailor counted 5 knots, he was not just measuring his ship's speed, he was measuring his speed relative to the coordinate system of the planet he was sailing across. This is why the knot survived the death of the wooden ship, the invention of the steam engine, the arrival of the telegraph, the development of radio navigation, and the birth of GPS. It did not survive out of sentiment. It survived because it is the only unit of speed that is natively, inherently compatible with the coordinate system that every navigator, whether on the ocean or in the stratosphere, uses to describe position on a spherical Earth. A speed in knots, multiplied by a time in hours, gives you a distance in nautical miles. A distance in nautical miles maps directly onto degrees and minutes of latitude. Degrees and minutes of latitude are what every chart, every navigation system, every GPS coordinate uses. The chain of units is seamless and self-consistent, all the way from the knotted rope in the 17th century to the flight management computer on a modern airliner. Which brings us to the aircraft. When aviation began in the early 20th century, the first pilots making long overwater flights had no dedicated aviation charts. The only reliable charts covering the ocean were maritime charts, the same charts that ship navigators had been using for centuries, drawn in nautical miles, marked with degrees and minutes of latitude and longitude. Pioneers like Charles Lindbergh, navigating the first solo transatlantic flight in 1927, used the same navigational frameworks and the same coordinate references that ocean sailors had used for generations. Adopting the nautical system, including the knot as the unit of speed, was not a choice driven by tradition. It was the only practical option available. The tools of maritime navigation were simply the best tools for long-distance overwater navigation, and aviation borrowed them wholesale. As aviation matured and developed its own infrastructure, the question of whether to switch to a land-based unit of speed was raised more than once. But every serious examination of the issue came to the same conclusion. For aircraft traveling long distances, crossing oceans, navigating by latitude and longitude, calculating routes that follow the curvature of the Earth rather than the straight lines that work on flat, land-based maps, the nautical system is not just convenient, it is mathematically superior. Statute miles, based on Roman marching paces, have no relationship whatsoever to degrees of latitude. Converting between statute miles and navigational coordinates requires an additional calculation at every step. Knots and nautical miles require no conversion at all. They are already in the language of the Earth's coordinate system. For a pilot calculating a great circle route from New York to Tokyo, spanning thousands of miles of curvature across a spherical planet, Working in knots and nautical miles is simply more accurate and more efficient than working in any land-based unit. So the next time you are on that airplane, half asleep over the Atlantic, and the pilot tells you that you are cruising at 480 knots, you will know the full story behind that number. It is not aviation jargon. It is not an anachronism that nobody has bothered to update. It is the direct descendant of a knotted rope thrown off the back of a wooden sailing ship 400 years ago, a rope whose knots were spaced at exactly the distance required to connect the speed of a moving vessel to the Tang coordinate system of the planet Earth. Cars measure speed based on how far a Roman soldier could walk. Ships and aircraft measure speed based on the shape of the world itself. If you enjoyed this journey from the 17th century ocean to the modern stratosphere, hit that like button, share this video with someone who has heard the word knot 100 times and never thought to ask where it came from, and subscribe to Normal Things, Crazy Origins for more stories about the everyday world hiding extraordinary origins. Because sometimes the most ancient measurements are the ones that turn out to be the most perfectly designed. Thanks for watching.